This is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be looking at another in-game scenario that deals with the bishop and knight. This is probably one of the most difficult in-games that you'll come across. It's not too common, but it's definitely one of the in-games that you'll want to know how to do. It's very good to study just to know how the bishop and the knight work together as well. Keep in mind while we go over this video, no endgame is going to be exactly the same, so while I'm going to give you specific moves, don't try necessarily to memorize the moves. Instead, try to understand conceptually what I'm doing and how the pieces move together so that when you do play, if your opponent moves correctly or incorrectly, you'll be able to take advantage and checkmate the black king with under 50 moves. If the moves does reach 50, it's actually a drawn game. So you need to know how to do it pretty quickly. So we're going to go ahead and get started here and go over some key concepts. Now the first thing we want to look at is this bishop. It's a dark squared bishop, and that means that eventually the only way to checkmate the king is if we can get the king down to one of these corners, either the h8 or the a1 corner. We can checkmate him on the a1 or the b1 square, but he's going to have to come to one of these corners. As black, he's going to try to spend all his time on the opposite corners. So keep that in mind. Another key concept you'll see is we don't check the king very much until the very end. We're actually just trying to surround the king, force him to go a specific way, kind of block off his moves from retreating from us, and then at the very end we will launch our attack on him. So the worst thing you can do is just try to check the king as much as you can. It's really not going to do you any good. So obviously in any endgame you want to activate your king early and often and use him because he can make a blockade pretty much anywhere he is against the opponent's king. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at this position, and first thing we're going to do is our king is way away from where we want him to be, so we're going to go ahead and activate our king here. We're going to go ahead and move him to e2, and black king is going to move to d7. Doesn't really matter right now where he goes. He's just trying to run around and have a drawn game after 50 moves. We're going to go and continue up the board with our king, get him more active. Black is going to move c6, and we're going to continue just chasing after him to d4, and black can continue to move. Now black obviously does not want to move towards a1. He's going to checkmate himself a lot faster than he wants to. So if he plays correctly, as you should if you are defending, you're eventually going to want to come to the a8 square. Then if you can, dance around back to the h1 square. But if he starts coming to the a1 square, you'll see with some of the concepts we're going over, he can lose very quickly. So more than likely he's going to go the other way. But first we're going to go ahead and activate our knight here. We've already got our king into the mix, and so our knight was over here, wasn't doing anything. So we're going to go and bring him into the game. Doesn't really matter which way you bring him into the game, but we're going to go and bring him to the e3 square. And black's going to go ahead and continue up here to the corner where we can't checkmate him, but that's okay. We'll eventually deal with him. So he goes to b6, and we're going to go ahead and start to bring our king up the board. Eventually we want to get our king to this c6 square, so faster we can get to the c6 square the better. Black, like I said before, is going to continue up the board here, and now our bishop's starting to get out of the action. So we're going to go ahead and bring our bishop into the action, and we're going to start taking away some squares. These blue squares or purple are squares that he can't go to, so he's got to move somewhere else. He can't dance around this way. It doesn't really matter which column he goes. If he goes towards this h square or the a1 square, it doesn't really matter. We're just trying to get our bishop active here. Let's see where black goes. Black goes to b6, so that is not a problem at all. We're going to go ahead and activate our knight a little closer into the game so he's in the action. And this is a check, even though it's not a check to make the king move. It's a check just to get the knight into the action here. So that is why that move was made. And the black's going to retreat to his A8 corner, and we're going to start to move our pieces a little farther. We're going to go ahead and move our king a little closer to the action so he can't come down. And you've already started to see that we've started to block off some squares for black. Our knight is blocking off some squares. We have our bishop activated, and so we've started already on only our 8th move. We've already brought about a very good position, and so we're going to go ahead and continue here. Black's going to go ahead and just move back. He right now is in no serious threat. He's in the A8 corner. And now our king is on the C6 square. Now obviously on other sides of the board it's going to be different, but in this case the C6 square is a very crucial spot for the king at the beginning. Now depending on where the black king goes it can change, but very crucial square, and you can already see that we've started to block off a lot of different squares. The black king can only go to A8 and A6 now. So he's going to go ahead and go to the A8 square, his trusted square. And we're going to go ahead and bring our knight to B6. And I got a lot of visuals up here. You really want to, I find it the easiest way, is to have your king on C6 or this square wherever it is on the board, C3 or F3. Or F6, and you want to have your knight right next to him. It's a little easier to maneuver. As you can see, we eventually want to just march this king all the way down to the A1 square. That is the best square that we can get him to, and we don't want him, if we have our knight here on B6, we want to bring him here. If we had our knight on C6, we'd want to bring him to the H8 square, but since we want to bring him down here, we have our bishop nicely positioned on the E5 square, attacking the B8 square. So the king cannot come here. He can't come to the B7 square because of our king, and so he's going to have to march down this file right here, and we're going to show you how to do that. So as you can see, his only move is A7, so he's going to go ahead and move there. And now we don't want the king to come back here. Our knight and king are nicely placed right now, so we're just going to go ahead and improve our bishop for a second, and we're going to go ahead and move him to C7. It's kind of the same setup as before. He can pretty much move to the same squares. He can't go back to the A8 because of our knight, so he's going to have to continue marching down the board here like we want him to. And now we want to stop him from retreating back to the A8 square. And we have our knight and king nicely placed, so we're actually going to move our bishop and block off this A7 square. So his only move is the A5 square. As you can see, we forced pretty much every move all the way down this file so far. So king has to move to A5, which he does. And now a very important move. One that if you haven't studied this in game, it's going to be pretty tough for you to catch. And we actually from here want to activate our knight and get him into the action. Our bishop is keeping him from coming back, but we want we do not want the king to make his way down to the H1 square. And so we're going to block off some squares with our knight. And that's going to be knight to D5. Like I said before, we don't want him to get to the H1 square. And this subtle move right here blocks off some of the squares that the king can go to. The knight's blocking off this B4 and C3, and the king has this B5 blocked off. So he is going to have a longer track to the H1 square. So we're going to go ahead and follow. Black king goes A4, and we're going to go ahead and continue down with our king, give a better position for our king. And the C5 square is actually the outpost for our king for a while. He is going to